Perfect, so everything is set. So good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is doing great and holding up with everything that's happening around us around the world and all these changes. I'm very happy to be moderating this session. My name is Sarah Awad. I am the Advisor of Gender Equality and Women's Economic Empowerment at CASO. CASO is currently implementing 2 projects funded by Global Affairs Canada, working in 22 different countries around the world. CASO is also implementing a number of projects supporting Indigenous populations here in Canada. We focus on engaging Canadian expert volunteers and technical advisors to build the capacity of our local partners through technical assistance, mentorship, training, as well as coaching. We always hear nowadays in the news that the COVID-19 pandemic currently represents one of the greatest challenges that the world has faced since the Second World War. In less than a year, the pandemic has profoundly changed daily lives, forcing the majority of people to adopt a new way of life, both physically, but also mentally. More importantly, this crisis is expected to disproportionately impact women and vulnerable groups in the longer term. In order to really identify and analyze the socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19, CASO has conducted an in-depth research with the support of an intern from the Monk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto. Since May of this year, we've been analyzing the social and economic impacts of the crisis in all countries where CASO currently operates. This was an important step in helping us shape, but also adapt our programs responding to the realities on the ground. We're very excited to share the findings of this research with you during this webinar. The research reports are available on the CASO website, and I will share the link in the chat of this Zoom webinar. This webinar will explore critical issues related to COVID-19 and how it has affected specific sectors in a number of countries where CASO currently operates. We will also be discussing the opportunities that lay ahead and the implications of building back stronger. So some logistics before we start. Please feel free to ask any questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box throughout the webinar, and I'll do my best to address them and make sure that our presenters also can address them. So the agenda for today is the following. We're going to start with a presentation by our summer intern, Alexandra Khan. Alexandra is a second-year master's candidate at the Monk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto. Then we'll have a short presentation by 2 of CASO's country representatives, one from Colombia and from Senegal, in order to give us some more insights from the field. Followed by this, we'll have a panel discussion with our presenters. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome our main presenter, Alexandra. She has done some really amazing work engaging with different teams at CASO, both here in Canada, but also in the field, in order to come up with this research.
Thank you. Okay, so the United Nations has warned that COVID-19 will hit developing countries disproportionately as a long-term social and economic crisis, undoing decades of progress made towards the Sustainable Development Goals. Without international support, long-term scarring will be unavoidable. Scarring is a permanent loss of productive capacity, and in past pandemics has resulted in depressed future earnings, higher rates of mortality, worse health and education outcomes, and reduced savings. After the 2013 Ebola crisis, Sierra Leone never returned to its pre-pandemic growth levels. And according to the IMF, the COVID-19 pandemic could see this result multiplied across developing countries. So the prevalence of informal jobs and the lack of technological infrastructure in developing countries make preventative measures very difficult. Many people just simply do not have the capacity to work from home and lack the social protection to support them in the event that they can no longer work. Given this, the UN has estimated income losses greater than 220 billion US dollars, which will result in an increase in food insecurity as more households are pushed into poverty and pushed into poverty. So micro, small, and medium enterprises are particularly vulnerable to the economic impacts of COVID-19. And these companies are a majority of businesses in developing countries. In Africa, for example, these enterprises represent over 90% of the continent's businesses and provide employment for 60% of the labor force. These businesses are small, typically informal, mainly driven by necessity, and face many challenges accessing finance. A majority of micro, small, and medium enterprises are experiencing reduced revenues and temporary or permanent closures, forcing them to lay off staff or send them home on unpaid compulsory leave. Among these enterprises, women-led businesses are reporting even more negative effects, even after all the differences in gender participation across sectors are taken into account. However, there are examples of adaptation among small enterprises. Those with the capacity to participate in e-commerce are keeping themselves afloat. And in almost all sectors, there are examples of adaptation through innovation. So women and girls are one of the most vulnerable groups to the COVID-19 pandemic. This vulnerability stems from a number of factors, including the proportion of women as frontline healthcare workers, the burden of care, and their concentration in the informal markets and the most impacted sectors. According to UN statistics, women do 3 times as much unpaid care and domestic work as men. This burden will likely increase as family members remain home from school and work. Additionally, this increased burden of care has resulted in a higher rate of departure from the labor force for women than can just be explained by the impacts on the labor market alone. Women are also highly represented in the informal market. 92% of employed women in developing countries work informally in jobs that provide no safety nets, paid leave, or insurance, and often involve low wages, extended hours, or unsafe working conditions. These jobs can include street vendors, craft makers, goods and service traders, subsistence farmers, domestic workers, and more. Since many women are no longer able or willing to visit crowded markets in town, and buyers' orders have been reduced, some have begun using online marketplaces to sell their products. In Myanmar, many have benefited from this, particularly informal social media-driven e-commerce has been a growing source of revenue for women. However, the shift to online shopping has had negative impacts for some women in the informal sector who previously made their living as street vendors. In Vietnam, these vendors are concerned that this trend of online shopping will continue long after the pandemic has ended. Lastly, the industries where women are most concentrated, hospitality and food services, and retail and wholesale trade, are among the most impacted. All of these factors serve to make women more vulnerable to the economic impacts of COVID-19, as well as increase their exposure to the adverse health effects. So the impact of COVID-19 on the environment may seem kind of ambiguous, but many fear that the positive effects are only temporary and the cumulative impacts will be wholly negative. So the positive impacts can be seen in the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and increased air quality, as well as in the return of wildlife to once polluted areas. But the pandemic has also seen a rise in single-use plastics, online deliveries, and disposable personal protective equipment, which has resulted in an increase in plastic waste worldwide. Regulations targeting waste reduction have also seen a global decrease. For example, in Latin America, environmental protection policies have been relaxed, threatening indigenous communities and increasing the risk of deforestation and ecological destruction. Additionally, the decline in greenhouse gas emissions is only a result of the reduced economic activity created by lockdowns and mobility restrictions, so it's not expected to continue as the global economy recovers. A very similar thing happened during the 2008 financial crisis when the decline in economic activity coincided with a drop in greenhouse gas emissions. However, the recovery following this recession saw a rise in greenhouse gas emissions that more than compensated for the drop. So if the global economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic is to follow a similar path, climate change mitigation and adaptation will be even further out of reach. So therefore, it's critical that countries make sustainability a priority in their recovery packages and are cautious about the support that's provided to carbon-intensive industries. So in developing countries, agribusiness is a critical sector as a source of employment and also as a tool for achieving Sustainable Development Goal number 1, no poverty. Making up approximately 55% of total employment in least developed countries, disruptions to the sector will negatively impact many livelihoods. Although agriculture is designated as an essential sector, it's still heavily impacted through restrictions on movement, reduced domestic and international demand, uncertainty about consumer behavior, anticipated loss of available credit, and difficulty acquiring input supplies. These impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic will negatively affect livelihoods at either end of the value chain, from field-based laborers to those involved in processing, packaging, and marketing activities. The impacts from reduced demand can be seen in Kenya, where the reduced global demand for flowers resulted in a collapse of the country's flower sector, which cut off income sources for thousands of workers. The pandemic has also created a shift in the produce demands of households and businesses. In Ethiopia, due to early misinformation about how COVID-19 was contracted, more than half of the households reported that they were avoiding animal sources such as dairy, while another 40% were consuming more garlic and ginger. In Tanzania, the UNDP has reported a reduced demand and a price reduction of 20% for producers of tomatoes and vegetables because they can no longer rely on tourist hotels to purchase their crops. Mobility and travel restrictions have created challenges accessing markets for both producers and consumers. In Benin, global travel restrictions prevented many foreign buyers of cashews from attending the start of the cashew buying season. Since only 20% of Benin's cashews are processed locally, smallholder farmers were forced to sell at a loss. Excuse me. Health checks and quarantines have also resulted in order delays and bottlenecks and a subsequent rise in food wastage. This was experienced by smallholder farmers in Tanzania who saw their produce rot while waiting to cross borders. The impact on women will be more acute. Women are a critical share of the agribusiness labor force. In Ethiopia, they contribute to over 70% of food production, but they typically work longer hours and earn much lower wages. Compared to men in agribusiness, women also have limited access to resources such as land, credit, agricultural inputs, training, and information. And this access will only be further restricted as COVID-19 reduces the purchasing power and mobility. So looking ahead, many businesses in this sector have turned to digitalization and e-markets to sell their products. This can be seen in Ghana, where some farmers have reported an increase in the demand for organic produce, which they've been able to satisfy through online or telephone ordering and payments via an app. E-commerce then will likely play a very critical role in recovery after the pandemic, and those without access may risk being left behind. E-literacy rates, poor connectivity, limited assistance, and low capacity are some of the factors that will inhibit the adoption of digitalization among small businesses in the agribusiness sector. So at this point, I would just like to take a pause and see if anyone has any questions on what I've covered so far. If you do, you can just type it into the chat box.
So Alex, we have a question in the chat box from Siobhan, and he's asking, could you tell us a bit more about the challenges small businesses are facing to expand in online shopping? What are some of the success factors that you may have found in your research?
Well, actually, for small businesses, I found in some countries they were actually at a bit of an advantage, actually, because they can easily switch their operations and adapt. but on the other hand, they have a lot less resources and have a lot of challenges accessing finance and training and stuff. So a lot of them just haven't been able to take advantage of this size advantage.
Thank you. So I guess we don't have any further questions at this point. Yeah, maybe.
I will continue. Tourism and hospitality. So according to the United Nations World Tourism Organization, COVID-19 has had the worst impact on the tourism sector. All across the world, there's been a collapse of the tourism sector as global international tourist arrivals have been reduced to just a fraction of their pre-COVID-19 levels. Before the pandemic arrived, this sector was rapidly growing in many countries and was a big contributor to job creation and national GDP. In developing countries, this sector mostly comprises of small and medium-sized enterprises, many of which have been unable to survive the continued lack of tourists. Across Africa, 80% of the continent's small and medium-sized enterprises are actually in this sector, so they're facing a lot of challenges. Some places are more reliant on tourism than others and will feel the negative economic impacts more deeply. The island of Zanzibar in Tanzania, as well as the Galapagos Islands in Ecuador, are two examples of these tourism-dependent places. In the Galapagos Islands, many locals involved in the tourism sector are no longer receiving an income, with one guide and scuba teacher reporting that he was immediately jobless after stepping off his boat one day. The COVID-19 shock to the island has had some residents wondering if they need to make a change or if the tourism industry will ever be able to revive itself. As women are more than half of the global tourism workforce and already experience a significant gender pay gap, the impacts on this sector are expected to fall much more heavily on them. However, as millions of jobs and livelihoods are at risk, the sector is looking for innovative ways to generate an income and speed up the post-pandemic recovery process. To help facilitate safe tourism in a post-pandemic world, the World Travel and Tourism Council has launched a Safe Travels stamp, which is granted to establishments that have committed to certain health and hygiene protocols to help customers feel safe in the choices that they make while traveling. Additionally, many countries are exploring domestic tourism, virtual tourism, and ecotourism. Virtual tourism is being provided by some tour operators across Africa as a way to remind customers of the potential that exists once travel becomes safe again. These virtual tours have included live stream safaris, desert strolls, and paragliding adventures to entice future travelers. Ecotourism is also expected to increase, as tourists are more likely to seek out remote, less crowded vacations rather than your typically busy tourist attractions. With these new ventures and innovations, some businesses in the tourism sector have been able to adapt to the new environment. The negative impacts of COVID-19 on the agribusiness sector will have implications for food security and nutrition in developing countries. Before COVID-19 struck, there were already 820 million people suffering from hunger, 2 billion people malnourished, and 700 million people living below the poverty line. The COVID-19 pandemic will impact nutrition through its disruptions to market and labor access, as well as shifts in consumer demand. Increased challenges accessing markets and labor can result in produce being left out on the field or rotting at borders while waits for a health check, as was seen in Tanzania. These challenges can be overcome by shortening the link between producer and consumer, as is occurring in Colombia, where local farmers are reaching citizens via WhatsApp and other platforms. However, nutrition is also impacted by a change in consumer demand. As measures put in place to prevent the spread of the virus restrict movement and encourage people to remain in their homes, the demand rises for non-perishable food products that have a longer shelf life but a much lower nutritional value. If this trend continues, it's likely that there will be a bigger need for fortified products. As well as threats to nutrition, the impacts of COVID-19 pose serious harm to the health of communities. With lockdowns in place and many services closed, many people will not have access to routine necessary vaccinations. The Vaccine Alliance, Gavi, has estimated that more than 13.5 million people will miss their vaccinations due to COVID-19 related campaign postponements and interruptions. The health crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic extends just beyond the direct effect of the virus on health, with the World Health Organization warning that service disruptions could result in hundreds of thousands of additional HIV-related deaths and an increase in mother-to-child transmissions by as much as 104%. For women and girls, the measures to combat COVID-19 can mean sacrifices to their sexual and reproductive health. Past epidemics indicate that healthcare resources are frequently channeled out of routine services into virus-focused efforts. Where health and reproductive services are already limited, these new challenges will mean increases in teenage pregnancy, unsafe abortions, and maternal deaths, setting back gender equality and exacerbating the risks to women and girls' lives. In Kenya, there have already been reports of increased female genital mutilation and a higher number of teenage pregnancies due to school closures. Because of the COVID-19 restrictions, the spaces where girls can access resources and learn about their rights are becoming increasingly limited. So the UN estimates that micro, small, and medium enterprises make up more than 50% of employment in the agroforestry sector. The majority of these enterprises do not have social protections in the event of disruptions to the sector, and therefore they are highly vulnerable to the impacts of COVID-19. These effects will be through travel restrictions and the negative impacts on the environment. So the forest sector supports livelihoods with essential products like hygiene and sanitary items, biomass for heating, ethanol for sanitizer, essential fuel wood, and packaging for parcels. And the travel restrictions imposed to prevent the spread of the virus have made the transportation and trade of these products very challenging, to the point where these products are not reaching the vulnerable groups who need them the most. The increase in deforestation due to the relaxed environmental legislation in some countries has also been damaging to the agroforestry sector. Forests are critical to sustainable development, stabilizing the biosphere and protecting threatened indigenous and traditional cultures. As agroforestry is threatened, so too is development. So, almost no sector has escaped the socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19. The International Labor Organization has stated that the economic shock of this pandemic will result in the largest global employment decline since World War II. The impacts will not be evenly distributed. Developing countries will be disproportionately burdened by these shocks long after the pandemic leaves. Within developing countries, certain groups are especially vulnerable, women and girls among them. The IMF does report that the strong recovery of these countries will only be possible with the support of the international community. Such support is needed to protect critical supply chains and ensure financing for essential social support services and a sustainable recovery. Many micro, small, and medium enterprises have shown remarkable resilience during this crisis. Through innovation and flexibility, they've managed to use their size to their advantage and find new ways to be profitable. For example, in Peru, small clothing retailers have made a switch to the more profitable industry of online food delivery. Economic life post-pandemic will not return to the way it was before COVID-19. The rapid rise in digitalization and e-commerce will likely result in a continued need for digitalization, and those without the capacity to perform risk being left behind unless the resources and trainings are provided to help them adapt. The environment has also been heavily impacted. Due to the pandemic, the fight against climate change has taken a backseat, and if economic recovery is prioritized in an unsustainable way, it will be too late to take meaningful action. However, there are hopeful signs that this will not be the case. The expected rise in ecotourism will provide an incentive to preserve natural and wild spaces, and the expected permanent increase in digitalization may ensure greenhouse gas emissions do not spike as they did after the 2008 recession. Governments are also showing up for the environment. In Ethiopia, the government has launched the non-motorized transport strategy, which works to incorporate high-quality non-motorized transport facilities into all nationally funded road building. So the strategy will help citizens respect social distancing guidelines by avoiding public transit and opting for bike transport or walking. And this will work to reduce emissions by reducing the amount of cars on the road as well.
Thank you very much, Alex. It's been very insightful, very informative. Your presentation really opens our eyes to kind of different aspects to what is actually happening on the ground, which is very interesting. Now, I guess before we move on to the rest of the presentation with Natalia, we got very interesting questions from the audience that you could respond to. So the first question is the following. Did your research come across any new groups of producers who have formed a digital marketing cooperative?
No, I don't think so. I mean, my research didn't really get into very specific producer groups. It was more very industry focused and a bit broad like that.
But I think I can hop on here and maybe add a little bit. The idea that Alex is really trying to put forward here is the fact that digital marketing comes as a cross-cutting theme for for a lot of producers. And again, as she mentioned, the way they have pivoted into integrating digital marketing into their operations is very important. And will become even more important as we move forward in the future. Another question that we got, very interesting as well, is, are there any new business trends replacing the tourism sector? So I think you touched a little bit on that in your presentation. If you can expand a little bit more.
Sorry, new business trends in
replacing the tourism sector.
Yeah, well, a lot of tourism companies have kind of decided that maybe the sector isn't really ever going to be as profitable as it once was. That may or may not be true. But many of them have shifted to agribusiness because it's always an essential sector. And even though it's still impacted, there is always going to be a demand for that. And also there's been an increased demand for organic products and healthy produce and stuff. So a lot of people have been able to find profitable opportunities there.
Another question that we got as well is, do you foresee the shifting dependence on domestic tourism becoming a permanent feature? How far would this influence overall revenues and employment?
Yeah, so I would say that varies by country. There was one country, I think it was Bolivia, where they were already fairly, like domestic tourism was already a big source of revenue for them. And maybe a lot of other countries will be able to grow their domestic tourism income as well. But I don't think it will be able to replace tourism completely. I'm sure the tourism sector won't fully be what it was until international flights are resumed again.
Thank you for that. So building on that, and as part of the research, we engaged with all of CASO's local staff from 15 different countries. While we would have loved to engage all of them in this webinar in the interest of time, we have with us two of CASO's country representatives who will give us a short presentation summarizing some of the insights from the field. So first we have our country representative in Colombia, Natalia Naranjo, who has managed CASOs in-country operations for a really long time now. In Colombia, CASO's main sector focus are tourism and hospitality, as well as agribusiness. So, hi, Natalia.
Hello, thank you, and good afternoon from Colombia to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the experience in Colombia. Alexandra mentioned different aspects in general that we have also, and we have these impacts also here in Colombia. We can start with the slides, please. Well, these are the actual numbers in Colombia for COVID-19 as per last week. There are more than 1 million cases and more than 30,000 deaths. Despite the early measures taken in Colombia with the lockdowns, the numbers of daily deaths have been around 150 and 250 deaths per day for several months. Now we're starting to go up again after the inevitable opening of the economy and different sectors in a wider range. Education is still mainly online, and work at home is also used when possible. This pandemic then caused in our country a lockdown for almost 6 months, with some restricted openings in sectors and different exceptions during this time. Now we are in a selected quarantine depending on the active cases of COVID-19, and local actors have some autonomy in the measures for the containment. A lot of enterprises were closed for this period of time, and the main affected sectors are tourism and hospitality, commerce, entertainment, parts of manufacturing, among all others. All the economy was impacted, and these impacts include both negative and also some positive environmental impacts that Alexandra mentioned also. For example, more use of disposable items from one side and pollution decreasing on the other. There are also impacts in the increasing economic illegal activities like mining. In Colombia, from 2002 to 2008, the number of people living under the poverty line decreased from approximately 50% to 27%. This progress could be reversed by the socioeconomic impacts of the COVID-19. Impacts are worse on vulnerable populations, including those suffering from armed conflict, natural disasters, displaced people, and women. Among all the economic impacts to enterprises are lost income, declined sales, and staff layoffs. According to the Andes University, 4.9 million jobs have been lost. Decline in informal employment, loss of human capital, and lack of working capital in a small and medium-sized enterprise or SMEs, increased public and private debt, exacerbation of existing inequalities. One specific case from our partners is the case of Yarumo Blanco Community-Based Association that works in tourism with national parks. They are just recently opening. They had to minimize payments and staff, and now they are looking for new staff as the old staff started to work somewhere else. They have other commitments or took another job during these months. Probably there are some other impacts that we are just learning and that are unknown now. Regarding the Colombian women context during COVID-19, there are some specificities. Colombian women are more likely to work in the informal sector, have a higher rate of unemployment, generally earn a lower income. There is a higher percentage of women than men in microenterprises and vulnerable sectors. These circumstances make women more economically vulnerable to the impacts of COVID-19. Women-headed households make up 40.7% of households in Colombia, with 29.6% of these living below the poverty line. Within the healthcare and social sectors, women are 74% of the employees, facing a greater risk for contracting the virus. Due to the lockdown, care responsibility at home has increased for women, along with the risk of domestic violence for women and girls. Along with women, indigenous people and minorities are vulnerable because they lack institutional support and access to health services. The impact on sectors that CESO work with in Colombia are, well, in the agribusiness sector, there is a decline in floriculture and has hit Colombian agri-SMEs particularly hard, as flower exports are one of the greatest source of foreign currency, along with the coffee sector. In the flower industry, there is an intense women's labor force. Many of them are head of households. Flower and coffee exports declined during the pandemic. 61% of Colombian coffee growers have reported concerns about the upcoming harvest due to reduced agricultural labor and expect a harvest loss greater than 30%. There is a health risk of the labor force, particularly for older employees of agri-SMEs. In tourism, between 2006 and 2019, the tourism sector saw a growth of almost 300%. And in 2019, it employed 1.4 million people and contributed 3.8% to national GDP. This is also a sector that uses intense women labor force. Travel restrictions and closures have left hotels with an occupancy rate below 3%. More than 2 million jobs have been lost in the touristic sector, according to the Colombian Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Tourism. The governmental response includes different measures like credit lines for SMEs, payroll and loan payments in different sectors, including coffee and education sectors, healthcare providers and tourism businesses, expanded cash transfer for vulnerable groups, subsidies to 1,500 tour guides for 3 months, exempt tourist and hotel services from value-added tax until December this year, launch of Colombia Agro Produce program, a credit scheme worth approximately $400,000 to supply seeds and support agricultural operations. We are still facing different challenges in the implementation of these measures, and this will continue for a while as we are in the process of identifying the best way to address this pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Natalia. I guess in that point, do we have any questions from the audience to Natalia that we can respond to right now before we move on to Ilaj?
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody. After Alexandra and Natalia, I'm going to present to you in the short time the situation of COVID-19 in Senegal. What we can say on the pandemic is the first case of COVID-19 was diagnosed in Senegal on March 20. And on the first day, of course, it was a general panic in all the population because they didn't know what was this kind of pandemic. There was also a mobilization of women to make a provision of food for the house. There was a gradual response taken by the government, like closure IDB Airport. IDB Airport is the international airport of Dakar. There was also a curfew from 8 p.m. to 6 p.m. and quarantine requirement. And there was also the beginning of, how to say it again, of virtual work. It was, can say, a new experiences in Senegalese, new experiences for the government, for the SMEs, for all our partners. And these experiences, of course, had a real impact on all the sector. And as October 20, Senegal continued its mobilization against COVID-19, like most African countries where CASO implement his program. Okay, you can go. Yeah. If I present to you the health indicators, We have more than 15,000 number of cases in Senegal at 2 of November, more than 14,000 recovery, and more than 300 deaths. And if we compare our situation to the rest of the world, it is obvious that our situation is not so bad. As the number of cases decrease, economic activity, of course, is picking up. Now the population is more confident to face the pandemic. We can also underline that Senegal is snagged to number 2 slot in the recent analysis, looking at how 36 countries have handled the pandemic. Senegal received also a strong marks for high degree of preparedness and resilience on fact and science. Okay, you can go. Okay. If we talk about now the impact, the economical impact, among a head of households who had a job before the crisis, we can underline that 36% I say stopped working. It is a very great number. 30% of which for reasons related to COVID-19. Individual work in the services like commerce, public administration, tourism, microfinance, transport and communication, and mining particularly affected by COVID-19. And 85% of households report experiences or drop in their income. Okay. The impact on the sector, on the agribusiness. On the agricultural sector, the workers appear to be far more spared by workers than the other sector. The impact was positive on this sector because what we can underline is that the population continue to purchase food and local product generally. To give you an example, our partner of Délices de la Mer, Délices de la Mer is a food SMEs processing. It is a fish SMEs processing. And Délices de la Mer means Delicia of the sea. Délices de la Mer increased its turnover since June 2020. Okay, you can go. Impact of agribusiness. In the bakery sector, the situation is very positive for the baker. The local demand, of course, for this period of the pandemic has increased. And there is a special delivery to household, the special services organized by the government, Ministry of Commerce, and the Federation of Bakers. The Federation of Bakers is a local partner of CASO. On the picture, you can see Madame Gay is a manager of Délices de la Mer and the president of Senegal, Macky Sall. There was a special showcase organized in Dakar. Okay, you can go. On the sector, I think that Alexandre said it. There is a general collapse of this sector all around the world. And Natalia also said it. It is the same than in Senegal. It is a most impacted sector by COVID-19 in Senegal. All the activities reduced to almost zero by the impact of COVID-19. Women have almost all lost their job also. Fortunately, there is a subsidy of the government who help to maintain some job in this in the sector. Okay. Now the impact on partnership. It is similar for all the Canadian organizations who operate in Senegal. I give you the example of CESO, we have CASOs program activity was halted since the beginning of the pandemic. There was delays in planning and strengthening partnership, And for CASO, we remain in constant contact with our existing partner and the new partner, because in the new program we have new partner, and to maintain this contact, we are compelled to have this to call them and to have virtual meeting, to have virtual meeting. I want to say, okay. Looking ahead, our partner expects additional support from CASO in order to address the economic crisis, like SMEs. They want to have more training. They want to have financial support. They want to have more than support we have in the past. Also, it is an opportunity for CASO to promote virtual assignment. The partner understands that the delays due to the pandemic and are still requesting assistance. We explain how we are delaying all our assignment at the beginning of the pandemic, and our partner understand this fact. For the gender-sensitive value chain approach, it is a very relevant strategy for our partner. That's why it is important to recover our how to say it again, gender sensitive value chains approach proposed by CASO will be very important in recovering from the pandemic, because we think that there are a lot of women in all the value chain, and so to support them, I think that our strategy is very relevant. So that's why I want to share with your audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elaj. Again, your presentation has been very insightful and very interesting. It really brings into life all the research that Alex and I have been doing. So I guess now we can move to our panel discussion, and we're getting a lot of questions from the audience, which is very interesting and very exciting. But I guess my first question is to Alex. Could you share with us a little bit more about the challenges that you faced during this research?
Yeah, okay, so well, I started in May, and each country was really different with how much information was available. Ethiopia, for example, had an official UN report documenting the socioeconomic impacts, but other countries, I had to dig a lot deeper and rely on local news sources quite a bit. The information was also changing every day. So when I started, the impacts were not really fully known. So a lot of what I was researching were the potential effects and what is likely to happen. Obviously, this changed a lot as the summer went on, and I was continually updating the reports.
All right, and now maybe I could turn to RCRs. We're getting a lot of questions from the audience to RCRs, but I have a question, and I was wondering, how were you able to pivot and adapt? What were the strategies that you used in order to cope with the current situation and the current crisis? So maybe I can ask Natalia first to answer it.
There are different things that we have to change. We are changing to virtual assignments. Then we have to change our communication channels, and now we are using more online tools more than ever before. The same selection of clients, we need to know that they feel comfortable with the use of technology, for example, and have an internet connection. For example, with the assignments, previously the identified partner needs have become much more urgent. For example, sustainability, digitalisation, and marketing. And we have to define better the scope of work because there are things that we can do virtually. As my role as CR and with our in-country team, we need to support more and have more personalized support to each client, to the CAs, to the assignments in general. We have been more like becoming like a co-facilitator for the assignments to all parties involved and in IT logistics and as interpreter, etc. And we have to do more preliminary work now and preparation before the assignments.
Elas, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, what we changed in our strategy is was how to introduce virtual assignment, because it was the only way for us to maintain the link with to our partner. So virtual assignment was very important, and now all our partner accept to experiences virtual assignment. What I said in my presentation is it is a new experience for Senegalese SMEs to have to use computer most part of the time, and virtual assignment was an opportunity for CASO to maintain the link with the SMEs. So it was our first change in our strategy. And the second is how the virtual meeting. We never use this kind of tool to be our partner. In the past, it is what we used to do is face-to-face meeting. But with the pandemic, it was how to say it again? It was an opportunity also to promote these tools. Virtual meeting. And the third is a scheduled phone call. Scheduled phone call also is a tool to facilitate us to touch a lot of partners, who are in how to say it again, in the suburb region, I want to say, because in some part of Senegal there is no connection, there is no internet. So the only way to touch their partner is to call them and to explain them what we are going to do, what is the planification, what is the next step. And fortunately, our partner adopted this our strategy. Yeah.
Well, I guess I can also build on that to say that, again, some of the ways that CASO is currently responding to some of the issues raised during the presentations by Alexandra, Elijah, and Natalia is by doing more analysis and more research to understand the evolving context and how value chains and how different sectors are being affected. Hopefully, this may help strengthen supply chains or value chains that have been affected and fractured. We're also considering if we can engage more online marketing experts, because more and more we realize that this is a need and that this is something that's really demanded in the field. So my next question, again, to our panelists is the following. Now, once we start looking at the future towards the recovery, we know that the recovery is not going to be easy. It will definitely require a lot of innovation outside of the box thinking. Nowadays, the technological innovations and the technology in general that have really proven their value and how much they can save time and energy as well as effort while still keeping business activities going. So the question that I would like to ask our panelists is, how does the Build Back Better strategy look like, and what are the opportunities for the future? If you can start with Natalia, maybe.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, there are different opportunities, and I think I will respond also some questions from the participants. Well, I think our program, Accelerating Women's Empowerment, is more important than ever. I think we are going to do well, we hope that we are going to do a great effort to implement, for example, the gender sensitive value chain analysis, so we can move forward in strength these opportunities and all the efforts that women need to well, women have to be supported with all these assignments, and these all efforts are not enough. Then I think our program is more important than ever, and we look for support also rural initiatives. Most of them are conformed by women, rural women that need a lot of support. Then I think we are in a good way to support women and rural initiatives. There are going to be some challenges with the technology, but for example, now there are some tools for financial inclusion. Now we use phones to do payments that we did not use before. So that's an opportunity also. All the social media like WhatsApp and different tools for to get closer producers and consumers are going to be also important. There has been important during this pandemic. Then all these technological tools to improve the sales and the different initiatives in Colombia are going to be very, very important. And well, I think even the recovery process is going to be very slow. I think we can do a good difference with this accelerating women's empowerment program. I think there are some other challenges because there is a large percentage of informal labor. Then we have to face that the different families and entrepreneurs need a lot of support to access to subsidies, credits, other measures, and technical assistance in general, so we can have a recovery of the economy as a whole. Well, I think there are more things, but I think we are running out of time then. So I left a latch to respond.
Yes, we are running out of time, but because the discussion is very interesting, I think you can take a little bit more time, a few more minutes, if the audience would like to stay with us for a couple more minutes. So, Alaj, what do you think? What are the opportunities? How does the strategy to recover looks like?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Natalia. Yes, we have a lot of opportunities here in Senegal with this pandemic. The first is, I think, the project and program that directly related to women empowerment and women SMEs. We have a lot of women SMEs in Senegal, and in our new partner, a lot of women SMEs also. So if you have project and program directly related to women, I think that it is a great opportunity for us to be more present on the field. The second is how the development of more advanced virtual assistants. As I say in my presentation, I think that Natalia also said it. Virtual assignment is an opportunity for CASO in Senegal, in all the Africa, I can say, to spread his program and to touch more partners. Support territories, it is something more maybe specific to Senegal. Support territories and regions to strengthen preservation of environment. So I think that there are some specific region in Senegal where there is a lot of economic opportunity, and at the same time, they need to be supported in order to preserve the environment. I just say you the region of Kaolack where the entrepreneur do the exploitation of salt in the region, and there are a lot of environment problem. So this region need to be supported. I think it is an opportunity for CASO to support this kind of region. And the fourth is the strength of mass training. We have a partner in Senegal, CEFOPEM, who work with United Nations Institute for Training and Research, UNITA. So it is an opportunity for CASO to do a mass training in order to touch a lot of people and a lot of specialists in Senegal and around the world. And lastly, support organization in finding, accessing fund. So it is a need in the field. So it is also an opportunity for CASO to work on this sector, and also support some organization like organization of microfinance, international donors, something like that. So as Alexandra said in her presentation, without international support, it is very difficult to have long scaling. Long scaling is unavoidable, as Alexandra said in his presentation. It is the same in Senegal. We need to be more present next to the SMEs, to be more present in our next our partner. So I think that there are a lot of opportunities we can use, and the challenge we are facing is just on the bakery sector, because it is very difficult in this sector to organize virtual assignment. So I think that we will have other way to organize assignment in this sector. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Elaj. Very interesting insight. We're getting so many questions from the audience. So in the interest of time, we're already going a little bit over time. So I'll ask a couple of questions to our panelists, maybe just one question to conclude this, and then give my concluding remarks. One of the questions that I found very interesting is the following. How will CASO be able to assist in countries such as Senegal and Colombia, where VAs cannot travel? And how do we engage VAs virtually, especially if the partner does not have necessarily technological research or technological means? Natalia, any thoughts about that?
Well, I think obviously there is going to be a gap with people, and some people in some remote areas that don't have really good connection. We have to be careful on that, and I think we can restore our on-site assignments as soon as possible anyway, because for sure there is going to be a big challenge. Anyway, people are now more engaged through the phone and through WhatsApp. And I was reading some questions. There are so many questions that is difficult. Really, probably we need to do another webinars only to answer all these questions. But in tourism and agribusiness, there are different opportunities, and small businesses and small initiatives have been used technology to distribute their products. There are some small initiatives in organic, for example, organic farming, that they already organize to send their products and use Facebook and WhatsApp to distribute their products. Then I think there are people that it was very useful to use the technology, but also we need to be very careful, because obviously there is going to be a gap. For example, with the online education, I think we are going to be facing different difficulties in this area, because in rural areas students are not able to have some classes online. Then well, there is that's a challenge, but I think some of the people and small initiatives they have been using technology for to sell their products, and they did it great.
So I just wanted to build on what Natalia just mentioned and say that CASO is currently working in partnership with Global Affairs Canada to look into how we can get more flexibility in the mechanisms of the contract, so that we can still support our clients, even though advisors are not able to travel at the time being. Of course, as mentioned by our CRs, virtual assignments is the biggest one, but we're also looking at other ways to allow us to support clients better during COVID. Unfortunately, I have to close this session. It's been very interesting and very exciting, but I have to conclude because we're already running out of time. So just to conclude, I'd like to say that there's no doubt that the recovery process post-COVID will be an extensive activity. It will require a lot of effort and time, but it can only happen through a more holistic approach to addressing different issues, including the focus on gender equality and women's economic empowerment. So just to finish up, I'd like to thank our presenters, Alexandra, for the amazing work that she's done. I'd also like to thank Elaj and Natalia for their great contributions to this discussion. Your insights have really been valuable and very interesting. Finally, of course, I'd like to thank the audience for attending this session. We hope to continue learning and keep the discussion going. Just a reminder, this session will be recorded and will be shared with the participants and on all CASO social media and website as well. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope everyone's having a great evening. And I'm sure we're going to continue the conversation. As Natalia said, we can just have one webinar session just to answer all of these questions. So thank you very much, everyone. Bye. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah.